Hi, it's Reeves here with 3 Murcielago gearboxes. Really only need 2 to explain, we just happen to have 3 here. Those 2 6-speed manuals, this is the 6-speed E-gear. And I just thought I'd run through some of the differences. They are very, very similar mechanically, but there are some differences, and when people trying to think that they've had a manual box that was an E-gear box or vice versa, there are a couple of obvious case points to view, and you can see what you've really got. Although they're in a way interchangeable, but there are still differences that people should be aware of. So, second shifter tower, for those that don't know, while I've got it in my hand, it bolts onto that bearing there, and the shift rod bolts into the shift rod at the gearbox. That's the only connection between the shifter and the actuation of the shift forks, which is probably the most direct I've seen on any vehicle. It makes for a fantastic gated shift. The gate sits on there. It's actually the front of the vehicle that way, and you're actually shifting that way. That's behind you, and that's why in the Murcielago the centre tunnel's so wide, particularly directly between the seats, because it's clearing, well, in particular here, that whole area. And whereas on the manual, the shifter's there at the front, and that's going, the narrow part of the tunnel really, that's just going to the front drive shaft. Front diff, that's the front drive shaft there. Okay, a couple of differences, but I may just refocus the camera. So here you can see a side inspection plate. It is visible behind there on the E-gear gearbox, but the E-gear gearbox also has a sensor input here, which is a hole in the bolts, and there is no provision for that here on the manual box at all. So it's an obvious point. They have the same bearing mount, it's just more hidden on the E-gear one, but it's the same. Excuse me. What is a bit also apparent is that the manual shift mechanism, the rod into the box, is a bit longer, and the whole shift mechanism of the actuator on the E-gear is very short and direct. And that's why these are so rapid. Despite people saying they're slow compared to the DCTs, the single clutch robotized manual is ridiculously fast compared to shifting manually. On this side of the box, you'll see another inspection plate there. That's also apparent on the E-gear, but it's also again got 2 holes and mounts for 2 other sensors for the shift forks to show what gear it's actually in. That's pretty much the main physical differences. The whole E-gear mechanism is on a frame that mounts, but really, as you can see, apart from the bell housing on the E-gear having a provision for a sensor for the throwout bearing, which there's no even hole on the manual box for that on the bell housing, but that is a separate part, which I will actually show, because I'll just remove the camera from the tripod mount. So this is a manual gearbox with a manual throwout bearing. Old Series 1 or early, even up to LP640, use this throwout bearing. Has a spring on each side here, and it's a cumbersome thing. It's not got great seals either, to be honest. On the other manual gearbox, it'll be more obvious, it hasn't got a throwout bearing installed. It has the oil flow holes
at say 8 o'clock, just off 12 o'clock. And that's true that's where the holes are to feed that bearing, which I just showed. The LP670 yes, the LP670 and a couple of the very, very late LP640s have the oilway holes at basically 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock. So instead of having the oil hole here, like on the older model, it's moved down here. That one's in about the same spot. But because of that, you can run. Okay, again, here's another old bearing, and that's how it mounts, like it slides on there. So you can see it's got the seal, and basically it slides on there when it's all put together. The LP670 and Gallardos and Audi R8s run this bearing. So when this is together, they're about the same size, but this is more compact. This is more compact, modern, has a better bellows, has better sealing, better seals, and is about 1/3 the price of that one. But what you can see is the holes. There's the one at 12 o'clock and the one at 6 o'clock, whereas the back of this bearing, you can see that if there's the 12 o'clock hole, same oval hole at 12 o'clock, this one at 8 o'clock has another oilway, whereas this one, so there's that 8 o'clock oilway, and this one's at 6 o'clock. So what you do, instead of running the old-fashioned bearing, this is true for all the gearboxes. I had on the E-gear box that I was running, I had that Gallardo bearing, throwout bearing, and that's the position sensor, which again reads the position of the magnet on the this part that moves. So that's the moving part, and it moves within the position sensor there, and that's what pushes against the clutch. This part here is what pushes against the clutch, or the pressure plate, disengages the clutch. So the only real difference, apart from the design of the bearing, is this bell housing. As you can see, this is a shiny new one. Although the box has been ice blasted, so it doesn't look too different. Whereas on this box, you can see there's no hole for the position thrust bearing position sensor there, like on the E-gear box, but also the round holes at the top and the oval holes at the 8 o'clock position. So the new Gallardo R8 LP670 bearings don't fit, so you have to change the actual bell housing, which is easy enough. It just bolts around. As you can see, they just bolt, separate, and it's true on the E-gear as well. And yeah, thought that would be a couple of pointers for people who, for two things. One is the differences between the E-gear and the manual box, and the other is for people who want to upgrade to a throwout bearing that's cheaper by like a third of the price of the old-fashioned one, and is more reliable and doesn't leak. Doesn't leak as much. And it's well worth the upgrade, but you do have to buy a new bell housing. And for those that are wondering, yeah, it's a flywheel, another bearing, but that's not quite a glamorous unboxing. But again, you see the 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock positions of the oil holes, and this cutout here with the screw mounts. This cutout here and the screw mounts. So this is a bell housing for an E-gear LP670, but it fits any of the transmissions, and by using that, you can use the LP670 / Gallardo / R8 throwout bearing. But just so you don't have to be worried, just because this bell housing has this cutout and screw mounts for the throttle, for the throwout bearing position sensor, it can still be used with a manual because it still has the bleed hole in the same place for the clutch and the input. Actually it's under here is the input line. So the cable from the slave cylinder at the front of the car comes and mounts under there. It goes through the oil ways in here, and that's the bleed. And of course, those holes and those oil way holes on the inside push out the throwout bearing. So I hope that was an impromptu, because I never have time to do this, and I've been meaning to do this for a while, a number of requests. Impromptu run through of the E-gear and manual boxes, and the LP670 bell housing and throwout bearing conversion in the one video. Hopefully that's obvious. And in the background there's my car jacked up, and if I don't turn this light around, it'll probably be invisible. I've got the everything out. I'm just cleaning up the engine bay and doing some new heat shielding, and I'll be throwing the manual 6-speed manual back in and documenting how you fit a 6-speed manual to a car that had an E-gear in it before. Okay, hope that's been informative.